So I think we are recording. So welcome to the 8th Eco-Dharma conversation, the series that we are doing in the last couple of weeks. We are producing this series because we believe that books that transform the world should not be books that are kept in shelves. Instead, these books should be talked about and digested and should be alive somehow in the peoples and communities, etc. So this is our 8th talk. It will be in English. But if you need interpretation, people who are in Zoom, you can press the interpretation button. And so today I will be talking with Reid, that is here. Guy is a filmmaker, director, also writer and consultant. He has spent the past decade creating films which highlight the work of astronauts, scientists, futurists, and thinkers in general. He founded some nice collectives like the Planetary Collective and the Constellation Foundation. And as he describes himself, he works to his work serves to parse the technical and scientific narrative of sustainability into stories, visuals, and language that can be communicated to a wide audience. He is also, if I'm not mistaken, an anthropologist by formation. He also studied he also did a master in sustainable development. And we actually met in a study group because it's nice that we have such a group that try to digest these books that we believe that are transformative. And of course, one of those books that we read in this group was Eco-Dharma from David Lloyd. So that's why we are here. And welcome, Guy. It's nice to have this talk with you.
Hey, Bruno, and hello to everyone. Yeah, very excited to talk about Eco-Dharma. Bruno, I don't know if I mentioned this as well, but David Lloyd, who is the author of Eco-Dharma, is in both my films. He's in my short film overview about the overview effect, which we might talk about today. But he's also in my feature film called Planetary, which is really a sort of Eco-Dharma film. So I know David, I love David very much. So I'm very excited to talk about Eco-Dharma and excited to talk to everyone here and have a good discussion.
Nice. So yeah, yes, by the way, I was watching the Planetary documentary just some hours ago, so to get inspired for our conversation. It's such a good thing. It has a lot of remarkable scenes and sentences I recommend to everyone. So I prepared some questions, but of course we can talk freely here, but I prepared some questions to guide us to some key ideas regarding digesting this whole set of ideas that the book brings and that is connected to everything else. So the first idea, we've been talking about many times in our group, we are talking about the importance of creating new stories. It's also David mentions that in the book and in many writings of his, and you yourself have been devoting your life to do that, to the process of creating new stories. Leslie, you mentioned that your focus right now is directed to quote, the place where cosmology and ecology meet, in terms of the kind of stories you want to create. Can you explain a little bit of what you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, you can see the cosmos behind me. It's something I'm very interested in. And I'm going to find another image that I'm going to put as my background, because I usually have a different image than this. But I always like to start by saying that, we often, I think, how can I say this? Like, the importance of knowing our orientation, our place, is often overlooked, I think, in our contemporary society. So whatever problems you got, whatever issues are coming up, it doesn't matter, because you're just here, right? You're just this little bit of energy in this big living matrix of the universe. And so I often think that traditional people, some say indigenous people, or pre-modern people in particular, had a very strong sense of where they were. They had a strong sense of their cosmology, right? Their knowledge of cosmos, of the world. And so I am personally interested in how we can use cosmology as a way to frame the big situation that we find ourselves in today. And while I think it's important to think about these larger cosmologies like the galaxy, I think the most important image that we have of our cosmology is our planet. And so I'm trying to find this image. I usually have it in my stored images, but I'm particularly fascinated by how we can utilize this experience of seeing the planet from space as a way to reimagine our current predicament. So my work is kind of focused on that primarily. And I've been using astronauts as a vehicle to express this deeper emotional connectivity to our home, the planet. So I'm going to find the image, because I want to show you a very specific image, which is an image that we use a lot in our work. And it's basically an image, the first image ever taken of the planet by human hands. So bear with me 1 second. I probably should have done this at the start, but give me 1 second. Bruno, I might ask you to ask a second question while I'm doing this, if that's okay.
No, yes.
Sorry.
So, yes. So you understand that ecology is in some sense connected to that, because somehow this kind of image of the Earth, of the space, of our place in space. This is the image.
But please carry on with the question.
Yes. So if I understand correctly, the idea, this meeting of cosmology and ecology refers to the fact that by imagining ourselves in some way, our actions towards the environment we live in change somehow. It's something along that line.
Yeah, exactly. I think the issue is that, when you grow up and you learn about the world as a child, often the way that we understand the idea of the world, as it were. If, for example, I'm going to Google it now, right? For example, if I Google the world and I look at Google Images, one of the first things that comes up is, I'll show you. I'm a filmmaker, so I like to use images a lot, right? But one of the first images that comes up in a major way is this image. It's not the image behind me. It's this image, okay? So most people think about the world, it might be inverted, but you get the idea. This is a flat sense of nation states, all with different borders. Some of them, it's like a board game of Risk, right? Some of them have got more power, some of them have got other power, and we're on this kind of infinite plane where we're trying to get all of the goods to build up our little armies and all of these things. And this, this is kind of the image that the world operates on. This is pretty much the sort of standard ground assumption of how the world is, okay? So I'm interested in changing that ground assumption, okay? And so in 1968, December 24th, Christmas Eve, 1968, this image was taken. It's the first image ever taken of the planet. Can you even see a nation state here? I don't think so. In fact, all we see is a singular, I hesitate to say entity, but a singular field in which we find ourselves in this closed loop system. And so this image was taken on Apollo 8. Apollo 8 was the first craft, you know, the first ones, they just went around the planet. And then Apollo 8 was the first to leave and go to the moon. It didn't land, but on the way out, these guys, I met the guy that took the photo, actually. In fact, I saw the original negative, which was very cool. You know, they get the camera, the Hasselblad, and they take the picture. And at the time, they didn't even think about what they were doing. But when this image came back, in fact, there was a guy, Stuart Brand, very famous American guy, who petitioned NASA to release the images because NASA didn't really care. They said, oh, we'll have these images, what have you. Put Stuart Brand, he now has a foundation called the Long Now. He started the Earth catalog, very famous catalog, and they got these images out. And this image and then the Earthrise came out in the late 60s. And the implications of this image were fantastic. Now, the problem is this image comes out end of 1968. So for most of 1969, you know, there's this little period of 6 months where everyone's talking about this image. And they're saying, how do we reimagine ourselves in the cosmos? How do we reimagine our species? It's in Time magazine, Life magazine, New York Times, all over the world. And the astronauts, they went on this parade all around the world. But then July 1969, this image is replaced by a different image, a guy with a flag, American flag, standing on the moon, right? A conquistador, okay, on the moon. So unfortunately, our memory of this period is kind of about the conquistador with the flag on the moon. But there's this beautiful 6 months, 69, like I said, 68, end of 68, 69, where you have this people really asking these big philosophical questions. So I want to go back to this period of time and try to initiate this conversation again. And so I brought together astronauts from all around the world. I made a short film that went viral, 8 million views. Suddenly people were trying to talk about this concept, the overview effect, seeing the planet in this way. And so now I got 50 astronauts. There's only 570 people been to space since 1961. Only about 50 look like the rest of the world. You know, most of them are white guys from America and Russia, test pilots. You know, they have the short hair. You know, there's this small group of people that look like the rest of the world. So I wanted to bring them together, different religious, ethnic, cultural, philosophical backgrounds, but this same universal given that this is our home. You know, this is our planetary home. This is the foundational starting point from thinking about who we are rather than the previous image. I have no idea if that answered your question, Bruno, but I can't even remember your question. I'm sorry.
I don't know either if it answers my question, but it answers something very nice. So I don't know what the question is, but the answer is nice.
Okay.
But regarding that, I also like to ask to add some personal notes on that, to understand how you came to care about this. But I wanted to ask something a little bit more specific on that, also connecting to our subject. So because I know that, for example, David Loy appears in at least one of your movies, maybe also the other one.
Both,
also.
Yeah, both, yeah.
Yes. So you've been in contact with him for some years, and you read Echo Dharma more than once, and you read other books from him. So in this trajectory that made you as you are now, how the contact of, because also you are a Buddhist practitioner as well. So these things that somehow David tries to bring together in the book, this kind of inner transformation together with outer transformation, somehow you've been living that in your own way. So my question is, how this contact with Ekodharma and with David, and how this influenced your view?
Yeah, it's kind of simple. When I was 15 years old, I read this book. It wasn't David's book. It was a different book by a British physicist who's like interested in consciousness. And he wrote this book called The Awakening Earth, in which he was talking about the Gaia theory, you know, like the planet is like a living organism. And he was talking about how humanity is like a super organism within this super organism, the Gaia, and that we were kind of like a neural network, you know. So I was like 15. I read this with my friend. I had a friend growing up. We used to skateboard, hang out, and you know, the opening of the book had a passage about one of the astronauts talking about their experience. And so it had this big impression. There was one aspect of the piece that I thought was very interesting, where the book talked about how we often think about ourselves as separate from the planet, right? There's the planet and there's us, you know, humans, and that somehow we are sort of disconnected or separate. Humans are on the planet, you know, like I think it's maybe a holdover of the previous cosmology, Abrahamic cosmology. You know, God makes the world and then he makes humans and then he puts humans on the world or whatever, something like this. But this book was talking about from the ecological perspective of, well, we are of, not on, of. So we actually emerged and grew as a species within this biosphere, and that in fact we are this aspect. Humanity and our self-reflective awareness are an aspect, an evolutionary aspect of the life of the totality of the planet, the evolutionary continuum, and not just the planet, the solar system, the galaxy. So this book said all this cool stuff. I was 15. And my friend and I said, wow, this is amazing. And I started to think about myself as a cell within the body of the planet, you know? And it used to make me feel very relaxed, very peaceful, you know, like a sense of being embedded, you know, it's difficult to talk about because it's more of an emotional sense, but it gave me this a sense of meaning, I guess, but not meaning in this traditional sense, but rather one in which I felt part of this, you know, kind of phenomenal system of life. You know, so I read this and I gave it to all my friends and I said, hey, you got to read this. And I go to the skate park, you got to read this book. The book was out of print. I could buy it for like a dollar, you know, £1. So we give it to my friends and no one read it. None of my friends, literally not one person read it. So my friend and I, we sat there, we said, okay, no one's read this. We have to make a film because they'll watch a film. So we made a film. That was it. So that's how we made the film. It's pretty simple. It took us a while, but we said to our friends, okay, don't worry. We'll. So that for me was very interesting. And then as I grew up, I started thinking about this feeling. I'd have this reference point of this interconnectivity, you know, feeling embedded, nested into this interconnected system. And I looked at all the different religious traditions. I didn't grow up religious. Britain is not particularly religious. You know, we have Darwin on the money. Even though the Queen is the head of the state, no one takes it seriously, really. So we don't have religion like in America, for example. So I was interested and I was like looking, and then I found Buddha Dharma and I said, oh, wow. And then I met my Lama, who's from Tibet, and I said, okay, he's doing something right. What's his method? And I tried to learn his method, you know. And so for me, it was the most coherent system that spoke to this experience of interdependence. So that's how I became a Buddhist. That's how I became a filmmaker.
So somehow this is very convergent to the way David Loy sees his practice as a Buddhist. And so when you connected to him, how it was in terms of that?
So I started to read David's work, and he had many, I could find all these PDFs of his papers that he put out. And then I found the books and I read everything of him because I thought he did a very good job, in my opinion, of talking about the relationality of human civilization and the biosphere. And I won't talk about it because it's kind of, it's not difficult to understand. It just is a big conversation topic. But he has this wonderful idea of nomos and physis that he uses in his books. And then he also had this wonderful idea about the self, this Buddhist idea of dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, and the self, the Atman. And he basically had this really interesting way of thinking about how he brought in the existential psychologist Ernest Becker, who wrote the famous book, The Denial of Death. And David Loy applied the same principle, not to our denial of death, but our denial of selflessness. So our denial of shunyata. And I thought it was a very brilliant way of thinking about modernity and the traditional Buddhist systems. And it spoke, it made me kind of have the X-ray vision, when you find a very good idea, you feel like you have the X-ray vision and you can look at things in a different way. So David gave me that very, very well. And then we spent time together. I interviewed him and we had a wonderful time together I met him in Colorado, and we went to see Gary Snyder, actually. Gary Snyder is one of my favorite people of all time. I grew up reading Gary Snyder. In fact, I have a terrible romantic view of America because of Gary Snyder, because I feel everyone in America when I was a child was like a beatnik Buddhist hippie interested in anarchism. Unfortunately, I've been in America for 12 years. I haven't met very many people like that, but I always thought there was. So we met Gary Snyder and spent time together, and I'm in awe of David's work. And I want him to be in all of my films, actually, because I think his way of thinking about things is very broad and universal. And I wish more people would know his ideas. I think they will eventually.
Yes. I want to come back to some of these ideas in a bit, but another ingredient I wanted to ask from that panorama is because you have this background in anthropology, and anthropologists are some special kinds of people in many senses. But I think one important sense is that when you have close contact with people that live a radically different life, also displays something, I don't know how to describe it, something in people's minds. And maybe this something is related to Buddhism, to the way Buddhism transforms views, and the way seeing the earth like this transforms views. So how do you think this, or better saying, do you think these views help us relate better with these different people that still exist on Earth, and how?
Yeah, in my personal experience is a bit different because my mum and dad worked for British Airways. So my mum was a stewardess, my dad was a steward. Okay, so my dad was a steward for 24 years. So my sister and my sister's 2 years younger than me, we got to travel all around the world because my parents get the free flights, So, and you get the cheap, you go to the big hotels, but they only pay like 10%. So you can go, it was fantastic. So when I was, I was born in 1984. So until I was 26, I could travel like this. So I was lucky. I went everywhere with my mom and dad and my sister. And then, when I went to university, I had the option to keep traveling, and 26 was the worst year of my life because then I didn't have free travel. It was terrible. But then I carried on with my work traveling. So honestly, anthropology, yes, I agree 100%. But really, for me, it was about people meeting. I mean, it's the same, right? It's the same. I think it's the same idea as your question. But I was lucky enough to grow up going to many different places in the world and seeing the commonality of people and the differences. And I think my parents I'm very lucky. I have wonderful parents, really. And my mom especially is a very big people person, And so she would always make me notice things. My sister and I, we would go, to somewhere, like, I don't know, like the Caribbean, St. Lucia, or go to India. And she'd stop and she would make me see everything. Look how they're eating. Look at this, look at this, look at this. So you can see. And I remember having this wonderful appreciation for how colorful and interesting and diverse. And then, of course, I have to go back to England. It's raining, it's gray, people are very boring, food is terrible, be very careful if you go to the United Kingdom, okay? Don't eat British food, okay? But, so I remember this contrast between this beautiful, vibrant, alive world and this very boring, gray British world, right? So for me, of course, I left England because of this. I think psychologically it impacted me, but there was something for me about the commonality, the universality of the human experience, however diverse it was. And I've been very lucky. I got to spend time with people from indigenous people from Colombia, the Mamos in the Kogi people. I don't know if anyone knows about them. Very, very interesting people. In fact, one of the Kogi Mamos is in Planetary. And then the Kogi are very interesting because they live in these caves in the Andes. And then they keep some of the people in the cave till they're 18, right? So they stay until they're 9, they then leave, and then they stay in the caves until they're 18. And then when they're 18, I think 18 or 16, but when they're adults, and then they let them come out, and then they see the Andes, the mountains, and they say they have an experience of awe so profound they never recover, so they become mamos, they become like the shaman, right? And also East Tibet, some of the people from Kham, people, so-called very different people, very nomadic people from the Himalayas, totally different people. But I always felt that there's this commonality, and there's a sense of people being fully human, and this expression of being fully human. And then we have these cultures I found in England, for example, kind of suffocating cultures where we are limited. Our humanity is somehow limited. So we don't get to fully express our humanity. So I never saw it as different types of humans. It was more about human flourishing. Like, are we given the conditions in which we can fully be fully human? I spent time with Dalai Lama, for example, and Dalai Lama, of course, when I first went to meet him, I thought, oh, he's going to be like superhuman, bodhisattva, superhuman, like X-Men, completely different from. No, I felt he was just fully human, embodied humanity fully, So that was my experience, and my experience with studying at SOAS in London, with many different people from around the world. It's the same principle. So, and I think it points to this worldview, this commonality, right? Same home, same human kin family. And then the big question is same future,
Yes. It's, I guess this is one of the things whatever is the worldview we are embracing as a global society, it must include this commonality and this interdependence between the humans. But also there is this aspect that is transcending humans. Also, our relation with non-human things, non-human beings is also important. Because I was also, when I was preparing some questions, I was rereading in the book that part when he described is that, for example, for the historical Buddha, trees were very important. This is something we usually don't think about, but he was hit over a tree. He died over a tree. He talked about tree spirits and all of those things. And naturally, if we look at religious people, like people that are devoted to direct knowledge of, I don't know, we can call transcendence. Usually, this is very strongly tied with nature somehow, either with trees or with mountains, with the desert or something like that. So yeah, so how do you think this connects to this different experience of humanness connects to this experience of being together with other non-human beings?
So that same story about Lord Buddha, him sitting under the tree, there's also another aspect there as well that people also miss, I think. I don't know, I don't hear it emphasized enough, that after Lord Buddha became enlightened, according to the tradition, that the two things happened. The first is he saw the morning star, which is Venus. So he witnessed the morning star. And then it said that the Gaia, the Earth Mother, shook and acknowledged his enlightenment. And I think it's a really beautiful aspect of the story because, like you said, you have the tree, you have the Gaia, and you have the cosmos. And so it kind of roots in the very beginning of the tradition, in the mythos of the tradition. There's this understanding of our cosmic, planetary, and then our biophysical nature. So I think there's this term actually. So my short film Overview is about this phenomenon called the overview effect. Is the term coined by this Harvard professor called Frank White. And it's basically this idea that when astronauts go to space, they see the planet and they have a change of perspective. And some of it is profound, some of it is not as impactful, but they still have this shift. And some people, it just is a much stronger experience. I started to try to figure out what is this experience, what's happening. And I came across this work, which relates to your question, Bruno, by this guy called E.O. Wilson. E.O. Wilson was he just died actually, maybe 2 months ago. He was in his 80s or 90s even. He was an entomologist. He studied ants and insects, but he also became like a social theorist, like a eco-social theorist. And he came up with this term you might have heard before, biophilia, right? I don't know if you're aware of this term. So I realized that the overview effect, this experience of astronauts, was like a type of experience that you could call biophilia or biophilic. So bio, life, philia, to love. And a philia is the opposite of a phobia. So we are very aware of, in Brazil, of course, arachnophobia, okay? Those big, the guys that come into the barber shops, this is why I have long hair. I can't go into these barber shops thinking about the big spiders, I read about this once when I was younger. I think this is why I have the long hair. But so arachnophobia, claustrophobia, we understand the phobia. It's like an instinctual, if you're arachnophobic and you see a spider, it's instinctual. It's not like a thought. So philia is the opposite. But instead of aversion, it's attraction, okay? So biophilia basically is this instinctual need to have life in its raw form. So for example, I lived in New York for 10 years. The most expensive houses in New York look over Central Park, right? The poorest houses in New York, you cannot see any trees, okay? So it's instinctual that we crave this kind of bios, this life. And in fact, they did many studies about this. There's a field, eco-psychology. I think even David mentions it in the book, where they realized that even the way buildings are built, if they are built in certain patterns, fractal patterns, and like a lot of the Hellenistic tradition, and in India as well, the way that the temples are built, they follow these natural patterns that are our optical nerve. And this system relaxes our body when we experience this. So we are kind of wired in, So the idea that non-human life, whether it's plant or animal, is not something that is some sentimental thing that we can say, oh, I love, trees or plants. It's embedded into our neurophysiological systems. And it creates a sense of relaxation or a sense of, alertness if we don't have this kind of nutritional need of like a biophilia. So in my own life, I've had many experiences like this. Obviously, I won't talk about it too much. I met a wolf for the first time in Sweden, like a wild wolf. And it had this amazing effect on me because I realized I'd never really met any wild animals before. Because every animal I met, my dog, my cat, they're mediated through human life. Even the birds, you feed the birds, etc. But I had very little experience of actually meeting a wild creature. And the dignity of that creature had this big effect on me. And I'll just say one story very quickly, not to do with me, but to do with an astronaut that explains this very well. So before this image was taken, this image 68, December 68, in July of 68, so 6 months before, there was Apollo 8. Sorry, not Apollo 8. I'm sorry, I got my dates wrong. In 2 months after this image was taken, in February of 1969, this image was taken Apollo 8. Apollo 9, they just went around the planet again. And then, you know, Apollo 11 is the one that went to the moon and landed. So on Apollo 9, there was a very interesting astronaut. And NASA had created, the only people that NASA took astronauts from were fighter pilots, test pilots, okay? The class 1, class 2, for the Mercury and the Gemini, which were the 2 missions before Apollo. Class 3, they said, oh, we'll have half test pilots. Test pilots are all kind of similar, right? Military guys that they get into these strange little contraptions and they fire them at thousands of miles an hour and they're going to die and they're okay. You know, kind of machismo guys, right? Class 3, they had a different group of astronauts. They had half of the machismo guys and then half of people that could fly, pilots, but they had a different background, mostly scientists. One of those guys was a guy called Rusty, or Russell is his name, Schwartzman. And basically, Schweikart, Russell Schweikart is his full name, but everyone calls him Rusty. And he's like a redhead guy. He's from New Jersey, very sweet, quiet, lovely chap. He was on Apollo 9 and he was on a spacewalk and the radio broke, okay? So he's in space like this, 17,500 kilometers a second, okay? 17,500 kilometers an hour. He's in space like this, is completely silent. The radio broke. They're like, hey, Rusty, we'll be back. 10 minutes, you know, boom, hang up. And he's in space and he's hanging there. And he remembered that when he was a kid, he grew up on a farm and there was this tree that he used to sit under. And all day he'd sit under the tree and he'd look up and he'd spend hours looking at the tree and being with the tree. And he basically taught himself meditation. This was in the 40s in America. They didn't teach meditation, but he basically had kind of learned meditation by looking at this tree. So while he was in space and the radio broke, he did the same thing. He said, I got 10 minutes on my own. I'm going to do what I used to do with my tree. And he was with the planet the whole time. And he's the first astronaut that reports this phenomena. Okay. And when he had this experience, he said that he felt like he was the term he uses, he was a sensing element of all of humanity. Like he could feel all of humanity. He could feel all of the life of the planet. And he felt like he was a sensing element of humanity. And then later on, a sensing element of the planet, and then a sensing element of the cosmos. And so he goes back home, 1969, and tells people about this. And they say, hey, Rusty, you've gone crazy. And they all thought he went crazy. And the only people that would listen to him were the hippies in California. They would take acid together and he'd sit in the hot tubs in California and talk to them. And he said they were the only people that understood what I was saying. Everyone else had thought I'd gone crazy. So I'm very hopeful because now when the astronauts come back and they talk about this, no one says they're crazy. Everyone says, oh, yeah. Great. I understand what you mean. And so I think this is wonderful. Our culture has evolved that we don't think the astronauts are crazy anymore. So yeah, so I think this experience of the non-human is incredibly, incredibly important. I don't think it's important. I think it's like a nutrition. It's like a nutrient, you know?
This is very beautiful. I also, when I was watching the Planetary movie, I don't remember who was it, but an astronaut saying that in some sense, the astronauts were the Earth seeing itself from space instead of someone from the Earth, as you mentioned. So this is very profound. So, but also I have a provocative question regarding politics, because of course, everything you mentioned about space as a catalyzer of experiences is very deep. But at the same time, space became some kind of a hype and used for some very bad things, for actually the opposite of this. Like going to space, since Bezos went to space, it became a symbol of negationism, and like, so we cannot do anything, we are screwed, we already destroyed this planet, so let's try to colonize Mars. So how can you avoid that and walk through this dangerous path?
It's really funny you say that. So today I was on a phone call this morning, and we're doing a different project with some, we're doing like a 10-year, because this overview came out nearly 10 years ago. So in December in Tulum in Mexico, we're doing a big event, like a 10-year anniversary, and we're releasing another film, like a 20-minute film. The previous one had 5 American astronauts. This film has 50 international astronauts. So it's like kind of like a retrospective film, but it's got a different message. And so the first film's message was the idea of the overview effect. It's pretty straightforward about this phenomena. And then the second film is about the idea that on the space station, you have a closed loop life system. There's a small circle, okay, of oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, okay? And there's usually 6 men and women living on the space station, okay? And they've been living on that continuously for 22 years, since 2000. That space station's been operational, always had humans on board. In October of last year, the oxygen went out, okay? And the alarms went off, okay? And one guy was doing a spacewalk, someone else was doing an experiment, very important spacewalk. But guess what? Everyone stopped because the oxygen went. So it doesn't matter how important the experiment was, everyone stopped what they were doing. Everyone on the ground, there's 15 different nations, right? Roscosmos, the Russians, ESA, the Europeans, NASA, okay, JAXA, the Japanese, they all stop what they're doing and everyone gets together and they fix the oxygen on the space station, okay? But this crazy thing happens. So these astronauts, same astronauts, come back down. And now they're in a closed loop life support system. And the alarm bell is going off again, you know, but this time there's no coordination in the same way. So I see the positive aspect of space exploration is actually it's kind of a miracle. Think about 60 years ago, Japanese, or 70 years ago, Japanese, American, Russian, German, British, you know, they were all fighting each other. And now they're creating this life support system for an orbital laboratory. So I think this is an amazing metaphor for how we could operate on the ground. If the will was there, if we can do it for here, in theory, we could do it for here. Now, the problem with that is that, unfortunately, as you said, the narrative about space exploration has been appropriated by a bunch of guys that honestly, you know, all of the things they're doing, they're trying to get applause for. We all did this in 1961. I mean, really, they're not doing anything new. In fact, the only thing that they're doing that's new is they're doing it with private capital. That's the only thing that's new about them. And I don't know, this for me doesn't get an applause. So, so they have these dreams, right, of going to Mars and colonizing Mars, okay? I don't know if anyone has been to Arizona or been to northern Canada, somewhere where you know, life is difficult, right? There's either lots of heat or lots of cold. There's lots of desert, you know. It's not very nice, you know, to live in these places, okay? The Atacama Desert, you know, these kind of places. So why would you want to try to change and terraform? You know, you try and change the climate and terraform of Mars when you have, it's like if you cannot change the climate here, if you cannot control the climate here, how on earth do you think you can terraform a planet that's going to take, you know, tens of thousands of years for it to become terraformed? So I think it's easy to get into this mindset of, oh, we'll trash this one and move to this one, right? But it's a complete joke, because for one thing, next time you find one of these guys, one of these crypto guys that want to talk about Elon Musk and going to Mars, ask them one simple question. How are you going to protect for solar radiation? It takes a long time to get to Mars. You know, the moon is 3 days, okay? Mars is more like, it depends, but really it's more like 9 months, okay? Even if they can do it in 3 months, this much solar radiation is going to kill you, okay? NASA's original idea for Martian astronauts were they had to be over 80. So when they plant the flag, it's like old geriatric guys, you know, planting the flag, because they're going to die, okay? We cannot figure out, the only way to do it at the moment is with water. You need to have huge amounts of water protecting. So every time you watch these movies and they have these little spaceships that go to Mars, is bullshit. Okay, you need to have a big water protection for the solar radiation. Okay, so how do you get all of that water into space? Okay, you need to build a moon base. So you build a moon base to create the water to go to Mars. Okay, we are nowhere even close. You know, how much do you think if the International Space Station is coming down, they're crashing it into the Pacific because they can't afford it, quote unquote. You know, we're not even close to anything like this. So certainly not within the period of time that climate is going to radically disrupt the life support systems of this planet. So it's all fantasy, to be honest with you. It's not to say it won't happen eventually, but, you know, home planet, you know, for me, the dream is this. You take all of the heavy industry off the planet and you have heavy industry in space and the planet becomes a garden planet. You know, like a botanical garden, it's like that. You know, this is like the Buddhist approach, I think, you know, create the botanical garden of Earth and all of the big space industry can go out here, fine. But we are a long away from this. It's fantasy otherwise.
Yes. Yes, it's funny that we already have a planet, but somehow we think it's better to try to copy this planet on another place.
Yeah. Yeah.
So before coming back to this big thing, I want to ask a more technical question. I'm trying. I don't know. I don't want to bother people with too intellectual things, but I think at the same time it is important because when we were talking about the book, you mentioned in the beginning, but I heard you mentioning this before, that somehow in Ekodharma's book, there is this idea, David tries to recover this division that were in place in Greek society between nomos, meaning the conventions of the human society, and physis, so the patterns of the physical world. So there was this separation, and you mentioned that the way David looks at it is somehow special, and we should acknowledge that. So how can you explain that?
Yeah, I can, because my new film is about this. So you have to be very careful, Bruno, because it's Friday afternoon. My brain isn't working. So be careful. You have to cut me off, okay?
Okay.
This is a Pandora's box. It's super dangerous.
Nice.
So I try to be as careful and concise because I don't want everyone to go to sleep. But very, very quickly, the way that I think it's important is this. The current economic, social, political order, okay, kind of initiated by Europeans and then Americans, right? The kind of, we can say maybe imperialist, if we want, but the kind of current neoliberal economic order of the planet is based on kind of a fundamental assumption that most of us have, unfortunately, which is this idea of the end of history. You know, Fukuyama talked about this idea that we've kind of come to the end of history. You know, the World War II, you know, good and evil, and then Soviet and America fight, and that we're left with the final result, right? Neoliberal late stage capitalism. And so it's the way that it's thought about, I think it's kind of become unconsciously thought about, is that it's some kind of natural state. It's some kind of natural inevitability of human life, okay? Now, Bolsonaro and Trump changed this perspective. Right? All of
Yes.
these people that thought this 2016 and before, they kind of suddenly, wow, okay, maybe that's not the case. But for me, the fundamental issue with this is that we forget that our construct, our construction is precisely this, a construct, okay? We, human beings, human species, are of the planet. We are part of this natural system. We are fusis, okay? Our planet, our biosphere is fusis, okay? Okay? A biophysical reality of the planet and humanity. But we have created a social construct, okay? With a social, economic, political construct that the Greeks called nomos, okay? So in Greek tragedy, okay? In England, you have to study Greek and Latin and, very traditional education. So I grew up reading the plays, right? Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides. So most famous probably is Sophocles, Oedipus Rex, okay? Most people know Oedipus because of Freud, but the play itself is very interesting. And, in this example, Oedipus, he is the king of Thebes at the beginning of the play, but there is a great plague happening. So it's basically a detective play. He has to uncover what happened to him, okay? And the blind sage Tiresias, he's physically blind, but he can see the reality of things. There's this tension that we learn about what happens. And once Oedipus finds out, he stabs his eyes, okay? He becomes physically blind. What does he find out? He finds out that he accidentally killed his father. He didn't know it was his father. And then he mated with his mother. He had children with his mother, okay? So so his whole social order, his whole nomos is a misperception and is based upon a false understanding of the natural order of things. And so tragedy ensues. And all of the Greek tragedies are this. Nomos out of line with fusis. So when we go back to the astronauts and they're in the spacecraft and they're looking here, do they see the economy from this view? No, they see the planet. It's pretty simple. They see the primary system, the planet. And they can then see, there's humans embedded within this planet. And humans in turn constructed social, political, economic structure. So clearly planetary, planet, human, economy. But when they get back down to the planet, same crazy thing happens. It flips. Primary system is the economy. Secondary system is humanity. Tertiary system is the planet. So we're like upside down. We're like Oedipus. Same principle. Okay. So and we're now trying to discover we are like Oedipus now trying to discover the truth. Okay. And so the problem with this is that if even the term nomos, we use this term every day, economos, meaning the management of home, home, nomos, management or law. So economos. And so even the Greeks in our own traditions, our own Western traditions say this, economos needs ecologos. Knowledge of home, right, needs, management of home has to be grounded in knowledge of home. So economos needs ecologos. But if you go to Davos, if you go to the United Nations, who has the good hotel rooms? The economists. They have the big hotel rooms, okay? They're the ones at the table. And the ecologists, they don't even get the good, they have to stay in the motel and they come and no one lets them in anywhere, right? So we know who's in charge. It's not the ecologists. Ecologos is out of sight. And in fact, if you talk to most people, economists, about the importance of ecology, they think, what the hell are you talking about? But even the word, it's embedded there. So David's understanding is really important for me because the main issue here is how when we think about civilization, really what we're talking about is nomos, okay? And when we talk about humanity, really what we're talking about is fusis. And we always think about them as fused, and we need to unfuse them because it's not humanity that's destroying the planet. It's our nomos, it's our construct. And all of us didn't create the construct. This is the political part, right? Not all of us created this construct. I don't think so. I didn't. I'm part of it, embedded within it. But, we didn't all decide. Every 7 billion people, 8 billion people decide, oh, we should only 1% of the world's the world's population should have, whatever it is, 60% of the world's resources. So it's inherently a position of saying, if our civilization is a construct, it can be reconstructed. And how does it need to be reconstructed? It should be reconstructed with the foundational knowledge of ecology, ecologos, embedded within that. Like I said, it's dangerous, Bruno, because I want to talk about this one because I've been reading about this one.
Nice. So you're preparing a movie about that, a film about that. So this is
for 5 years. 5 years I've been preparing this movie. So it's like I'm now finally filming it, but it's like I thought it was going to take 2 years, like everything,
Yes. Yeah, I think this is very important because I think one sense of fatality that people have is like that the humans are destroying the planet, so the only way to stop it is to destroy the humans. But this is a completely wrong understanding. So instead, I think pointing, and also this loops back to Buddhism, because this mind training of understanding reality as constructed and as something that can be deconstructed and reconstructed is a fundamental skill for us to turn the page and take on new stories and new actions and new relation with the planet.
Exactly. I think this is the joy of David's book. Like you said, the Buddha Dharma has this tradition of the individuated understanding of the self as construct, psychophysical construct that, like you said, can be deconstructed and reconstructed. And so David's, the joy of David's book, Eco Dharma, is that applying this on a collective level. We also have like a collective self. Our collective self in this respect is our nomos. This is a manifestation of this, And I think the good news is here we are now deconstructing it. So this is happening everywhere, like there's a definitely, I think, in fact, even if we didn't want to, we have to, because of the conditions of climate change. They will force us into changing this, or they will force us into destroying ourselves.
Yes, which is an option on the table anyway.
Yeah.
And then maybe someone goes to Mars, and good luck to do that. So to wrap up a little bit, I prepared two more questions for you, but they are short ones. Also to not take too much of your time and people's time. So yes, it's a twofold question actually. So one question is, because this series of talks, we are, like I said in the beginning, we are trying to digest the book to make it alive. Now that we have this Portuguese translation and we have this jewel of this, we can digest it into the Brazilian culture and in this bigger network where Brazilian culture is connected, of course, also. But then, so this small series, we went on April 16th when we will talk directly to David, and actually we will bring together David Loy and some important Buddhist masters in Brazil. Some of them were the translators of the book, some others, they are, because we are a very lucky country in this respect. We have a handful of important Buddhist masters that are at the same time deeply engaged in the transformations that the world is crossing. So this is lucky somehow. So we will have this conversation. So one of the first part of my question is whether you would like to leave a question for them, if you want to pose a question for when they are talking in 1 week. And the second part of my question is, if you have to be so succinct and leave to the people that are watching this now or will be watching in the future, one advice to calm their hearts and to, I don't know, open people's hearts in these times that we are living. If you have one advice, what advice would that be? So one question for this conversation with the masters and lamas, and one advice to everyone that is watching or will be watching this.
Okay. Can I watch this, by the way, next week?
Is yes, there of course. You are absolutely invited.
I would love to be there to see this. That would be fantastic. The question I have is drawn from my experience with spending time with 16th Karmapa, because I was lucky enough to interview him for Planetary and spend time with him. And difficult to talk about him because every time I try and talk about him, I cry. So I have to be careful because British people are not allowed to cry. Okay. So, but he's really amazing, really amazing. And he had this very interesting perspective, which I think about all the time. He said that, first of all, he understood exactly the astronaut's perspective. He said the reason that they feel so much beauty is because they experience multifaceted beauty. I said, what do you mean? You know, and he was using these very technical Tibetan terms because there was a translator. And the term is basically that we have a perception and awe. We have an awe, like a, you know what I mean by awe, like AWE, right? Wonder, awe, but an awe with singular beauty. So you might see like a beautiful avocado. Say, wow, that's the most beautiful avocado. Or you might see the Mona Lisa and say, wow, you know, incredible, right? But it's this kind of singular, right? Awe for like a singular subject. And Karmapa was talking about multifaceted awe, that there were so many different aspects, so many multiple facets that it creates this kind of like super awe almost, which I thought was beautiful. Multifaceted beauty is incredible. So he was talking about this and I was saying, you know, I was asking him about this and he said before he was recognized as Karmapa, you know, he lived in East Tibet, okay? And he was a nomad. And he said the environment where he lived, because the environment where he lived is like very inhospitable. They have the yaks, you know, but that's it pretty much, you know. And he was saying that the environment was so pristine, untouched and pristine, that naturally the mind also that arose with this environment was a pristine mind. So my question is about this for the Buddhist masters, the relationality between pristine environment and then pristine mind. And is there this correlation? And is this why, you know, for example, the yogis go off into these very pristine environments that are untouched? Karmapa was talking about some correlation between the two. And so, but that's not my question. That's the beginning of the question. The real question is, if our planet is so polluted and you know, our environments, the elements of our environment are degrading so quickly, will this affect or how best to practice Buddha Dharma in this context? Because the elemental aspects are in decline. How should we think about this as practitioners? So easy question for them, okay? Then, and then my other response to your question, I will respond. I started with the image, I'll end with an image. I'll end with the same image, in fact, here. So this is my response to this. In our galaxy alone, they think there's between 100 and 400,000 million stars. Just our galaxy alone, okay? So, and they now found all these exoplanets, you know, all these planets outside of our solar system. And a lot of them look like they have all the conditions for life. I think soon we'll find this. So, you know, if we are here and we're this little efflorescent, you know, with this little beautiful aspect that can see this and understand this, it's like we are part of this vast continuum, evolutionary continuum of life, filled presumably with life. And so, however heartbreaking our current situation is, the universe is a process of creation and destruction and emergence, and we're embedded and part of this. And it's kind of like a roller coaster. And so even though we have this, I think most people here, of course, have this profound compassion for the suffering of the eco crisis, socio-eco crisis, we also have to remember this play almost, of the cosmos and of life. And, from a Buddhist perspective, we're kind of playing hide and seek, So that's what helps me, at least. That and good wine, very good wine. We work together,
At least here in the south of Brazil, we're still in I don't know how much for the climate change, but still we can produce some good wine. So that helps a little bit.
Yeah.
But so thank you very much for this conversation. I think it is nice, and I hope that so different people feel touched the way you felt and the way I felt. So somehow we can share our inspirations. So because that's actually our best hope to, I don't know, do something different.
I appreciate it very much, Bruno. And just one thing, because I always ask this, just in case anyone who's listening, I always want to make sure if anyone did have a question, I don't know if we have time, maybe we don't have time, but if we have time, if anyone has a question, I always like to open it, because just in case someone had a burning question. But I have time. If you guys don't have time, no problem. But I always like to ask. I'm always fascinated,
Yes. Yes, for me, it's okay if someone wants to ask something. If someone wants to ask in Portuguese, and then Lucas can translate it.
But I very much appreciate this conversation, Bruno, and sharing it with everyone.
Yes, me too.
Maybe there's no questions. If there's no questions, no problem. It's Friday night, actually, so
yes,
I'm going to keep you.
Yes, let's celebrate. But probably questions will come in the future. So, but we will keep in touch. So, okay, we'll have plenty of time to have other conversations and to ask many questions. Because actually, in our current situation in history, we have a lot of questions all the time. So, it's naturally will appear.
Wonderful.
So thank you again, and let's continue these conversations. And of course, if you want to come to the conversation next Saturday, you are more than welcome.
Yeah, I'd love to. I want to visit the eco villages in Brazil. I'm very interested to come and visit and meet the Lama, and it would be fantastic. So I'm doing another project, actually, a project about ecological housing, a film with another friend. And so it'll be interesting. I'd love to come and see Sebi, right? Sebi, is that how you guys say it? Sebi. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Anytime you want to come, you are welcome. And many places around the country, you find shelter and nice people to talk, at least.
Wonderful. Thank you. Definitely. All right. Well, thanks again.
Yes. Thank you. And bye-bye to the ones who are watching, and see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.